Hello, my name is Guy Kawasaki. I am the author of a new book called Think Remarkable. This is based on a podcast of mine called Remarkable People. And I also have a day job, which is the Chief Evangelist of Canva. And I live in California and I love to surf every day. And so I'm going to tell you how to make a difference and be remarkable in this episode.
How are the waves today?
For me, my sweet spot is 1 to 2 feet. So it's fine.
And is your daughter now far surpassed you in terms of her abilities?
Oh, by orders of magnitude, yes.
The other thing I really enjoyed about your book was you talking about all of the connections that come from an activity like surfing, for example. Very cool. So, Guy, when Bill introduced us, I was wondering, okay, what do I want to talk with Guy about? Because we could talk about the book, of course, but having been on a book tour myself in the not too distant past, I know that it can feel a little repetitive. And I coincidentally asked Madison, is Guy into AI at all?
Oh,
Because Henrik and
God.
I are obsessed with AI. And she wrote me back immediately, oh my goodness, he uses AI for everything. So I said, okay, let's make
We,
a conversation that's
we can
actually
talk the whole time about that without even mentioning the book.
maybe just by way of background. How did you get introduced to generative AI and how did you begin to see the potential of it yourself?
I just read about it. It's not like anybody from Google or any of those companies called me up and said, "Hey, let me give you a VIP demo." So basically, they said, "ChatGPT is open. Go sign up," and I did, and I loved it.
What was your first experience what did you love in those early days?
It's like Google or social media. The first thing you do is search for your name. I guess it got my name right, so I said, "Oh, this must be smart."
I also learned it just from some friends who was like, "Oh, this is pretty cool," and I got dumped into the playground, and I was like, "Okay." It reminded me of like when I was telnetting, using the internet for the first time, and tried to connect through Gopher and Veronica, whatever they were called. Why do you think there wasn't any hype until it was all the hype?
Yeah, that was the sun broke out one day, right? And I think prior to that, the actual use of AI for most people was so esoteric, right? That I don't know, it's gonna figure out fuel management optimization, or it's gonna figure out how many heads of broccoli you should buy to manage Olive Garden. I don't know, whatever it was doing. And then all of a sudden it says, okay, now you can ask it questions directly and it could replace your search engine or it can help you write or do research, which is very different than optimizing factory floor operations theoretically.
Do you remember early uses that felt to you unique? 'Cause I mean, effectively Googling your name that's not a unique experience. Was there an experience that kind of demonstrated to you the capacity of the technology that you go, "Oh, there's something different here."
Let's take a real world question, right? So you get a new HP printer and you cannot figure it how to put it on your Wi-Fi network. So if you go to the old Google, you type in add HP network to Wi-Fi, add HP printer to Wi-Fi network, and you get 750,000 results and 200,000 YouTube videos. And all I freaking want to know is how do I put this printer on the network? And now with Gemini or ChatGPT, it gives you, okay, so step one, go to system preferences. Step two, select printers, yeah, whatever it is. And that's what I wanted. I didn't want links. I wanted answers. So that was the first kind of aha.
That's great. That's great. And it speaks to you in language you understand, right? To me,
Yes.
that's one of the amazing things is you go, "No, no, I'm a Mac user, not a PC user." And all of a sudden he goes, "Oh, sorry, you need to hit this link and hit this," right? And whereas there's no conversation, you just gotta backtrack in Google, right? It's, "Oh, I'm clearly on the wrong page." Go
Yeah.
backwards to go forwards again. But in a conversation, you can really easily redirect and say, "Oh, no, that's not
Yeah.
the network name, or what I'm seeing is this. What do I do?" And it's much more like, almost
Like
like
a
an
human.
assistant kind of things. Yeah, yeah.
By the way, like a cool trick, we talked to Ethan Mollick the other day, and he had a nice little trick about Googling yourself on ChatGPT. Apparently, it's super gullible. So if you put on your own website basically what you want it to answer, you could really manipulate what it says about you. And so he has all this hidden text on his website now, basically for the chatbots to come by and then change whatever they say about him.
I can trump that, no pun intended. I found a company, or a company found me, that will take your data set and make you a custom LLM. So there's KawasakiGPT.com, and KawasakiGPT.com contains all my writing, my videos, my podcasts, transcripts, all that. So it's basically limited to me and the people I've interviewed for my podcast. So if you go to Kawasaki GPT and ask a question, I'm telling you, it's just you're asking me, except I think it's better. I think it's better at being me than me. And believe it or not, like people ask me for forwards and blurbs and guest essays and stuff like that. I go to Kawasaki GPT and I ask myself the question, and then I take that draft and I work from there. I have totally incorporated it.
Guy, after I wrote my book, we went in to record it in the studio. As from writing many books, I've only written one, but I have this limited experience. It takes a long time to write a book, and you're pulling stories and anecdotes and research, and you're learning things and you're jamming it in, right? New and old stuff. And then it gets edited, but you keep on living your life, right? And you keep on, I go to class, I interact with students and clients, et cetera, et cetera. It comes time to read the audiobook, and the recording team, I don't know if I'm weird or what, but the recording team found it very funny that I kept asking to pause because I wanted to take notes. And they're going, dude, this is your book. And I go, I know, but I forgot that story. It's not like no one's walking around with a book in their head.
Oh, and
Even while I'm reading my own book, these are great stories. I forgot this. But to your point, the GPT has the ability to quote unquote walk around with a book in its head.
I've had many situations where people come up to me and say, "Oh, in the fourth chapter, there's this story about." I'm like thinking, "Oh my God, I have no idea what they're talking about." And they're going to ask me, "What was the point of that story?" I have no idea. And they just got this brand new book. But for me, the writing stopped 6 months ago, right? And then, yeah, it happens all the time to me, much less to an older book. That's real.
So do you go to your GPT and say, hey, what did I say in chapter 4 of this book?
Pretty close. Yes. Yes. I'm telling you. Well, certainly, if somebody sends me an email and asks me a question, I often pose that question to Kawasaki GPT. And listen, I would love to train the world that if you want to ask me a question, go to Kawasaki GPT and ask first, because you'll probably be happy.
That's brilliant. Would you say so? Guy, this is an interesting question, actually. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Who is Kawasaki GPT for? Is it for you? Because I've wondered this. I have a rough equivalent of Jeremy GPT, right? Who is it for you, or is it for people who might want to reach out to you to ask you questions? I'd love to hear how you think about that.
This idea of using my own LLM to help me is a secondary idea. The primary idea was, let's try this experiment. Let's see what happens. And then it turned out so good that I started telling people to do it and to use it. And listen, all I want to do is surf right now. So if I can get an LLM to answer the questions for me, that means I can surf more. And I think that is a beautiful situation. Over the course of time, I am going to die, but now with Kawasaki GPT, I'm immortal, baby.
Singularity is near. With you,
What a great line. I'm immortal, baby. That's so good.
what are some of the things that you like, we use AI for to let you go surfing?
Well, yeah, I often have to add a HP printer to a Wi-Fi network. So there's that. I do that once a week, it seems. I use it, well, particularly when I'm writing a book. I'm not writing a book right now, but when I was writing it, I would use it as a research assistant to give me ideas. So I would say, okay, so these are 5 ways. Tell me 6 ways to embrace the growth mindset. Tell me 6 ways to become more gritty. Tell me 6 ways to show graciousness. And hopefully of the 6, I know 4, but 2 never occurred to me. So in they go into the book. And like some people may have like moral qualms that, guy, now it's not you writing the book. I hate to tell you, but at one level, whenever you read a Fortune 500 CEO's book, he or she didn't write it anyway, completely. Maybe they dictated a few things, but they did not write that. So I guarantee you that I wrote more of any of my books than any Fortune 500 CEO wrote of their book. That's number 1. And number 2, I think that my moral obligation to my reader is to produce the best book I can for their use. which is different than the best book I can not using AI. They don't care whether I use AI or not. And you guys have got Think Remarkable. If you can tell me where the AI is and the where I isn't, I would be astounded because quite frankly, I couldn't. And I guess the last metaphor I'd like to use is that to use a food metaphor, you go into a high-end restaurant and you want to have the best food you can. You don't go in the back into the kitchen and say, you're using a food processor, you're using a microwave, you're using this special tool. That's cheating. I want a authentic artisanal meal. All you can do is use a knife. That's it. No food processor, no microwave, no convection oven, no air fryer, no nothing. I just want you to use charcoal and knives. But nobody ever says that. What do you care as long as the food's good?
That's so good. I think one thing that's really interesting, Guy, I interviewed an amazing writer and researcher named Billy Oppenheimer a few months ago. One of my favorite interviews. He's Ryan Holiday's research assistant. And so he does a bunch of work for Ryan, but he's a prolific blogger and he's got a book deal himself and he's working on it. And as he and I talked about his process, to me, everything comes down to finding worthwhile nuggets. And he'll
Yes.
read, is similar to me and you and Henrik, I know, he'll read a 600-page book and it's worth it if he gets 3 great stories. It's worth it. He goes, yeah, it took a bunch of hours, but I found these amazing. And if he puts that in his book, is it untrue? That's a part of him now? No, I don't think it's untrue. He did the work. He went to seek it out. It fits his paradigm. He has editorial control. I think similarly, asking ChatGPT, as you said, hey, tell me 6 ways to grow in grit. What's happening is you're like the tuning fork, right? It's
Right.
like, and now the suggestions are hitting you. Does it resonate? There's no way you're dropping in your book
Well,
some cockamamie thing that you don't actually agree with, but it's just Billy Oppenheimer reading Einstein biography. And what he's looking for is that tuning fork. When does it resonate?
absolutely. First of all, give him my book because my book reflects 200 interviews, 200 hours cut down to 170 pages. So theoretically, I did a lot of research to get him more than 3 stars in my book. That's number one. Number two, I'll give you a real world example. So in my book, in the growth mindset section, I wanted people who made really dramatic career shifts from one career to another. And so I asked ChatGPT, give me examples of people who've made big career shifts. And it says Julia Child was a spook working for the OSS, which is the thing that became the CIA. So Julia Child was a spook to her mid-30s. Then she moved to France, fell in love with French cooking, and became the French chef. I'd never heard of that example before. I don't know. I'd have to read a lot of books to figure that out. And so that example is in my book. There's a picture of Julia Child. And when I first heard that, I kicked in Madison GPT and I said, Madison, ChatGPT just told me Julia Child was a spook. ChatGPT makes shit up. So you got to go check this out, make sure that it's true. So when I put it in my book, I don't get embarrassed. But that's a real world true use of ChatGPT in my book.
I remember that photo of Julia Child, all the pans on the back wall.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
So you just said, I don't know if you know it, you just said, I asked Madison GPT that's Madison, the actual person, not the GPT.
Yes. No,
That's
it's
almost
Madison,
it's,
the analog person.
Is there almost like a blending in a way? What I'm hearing you say in a way is in your research process, you're asking Kawasaki GPT, which is a person. You're asking Madison GPT. You're asking Chat GPT. You're drawing on all these different sources. You're almost a conductor, right?
Yeah. And you know what? I make an early version of my book and outline pretty freely available because I'm also trying to tap really the wisdom of the world. I guess I worked at Apple, right? And we were inspired by Xerox PARC. So I learned a very valuable lesson, which is one of the concepts of being remarkable is you got to know what to steal. That is a skill in and of itself. Listen, ChatGPT also told me the story of Jeff Bezos going from a finance guy to becoming a bookseller. And that story is not in my book because, I don't know, it just doesn't At the time, Jeff Bezos was in his whole thing about divorce one wife, find the other identical 50-year-old wife, buy a yacht, show off their biceps and triceps and their quads. And I'm like, I don't want to put that kind of example in my book. I'd much rather put Julia Child and Jane Goodall than Jeff Bezos and his wife.
Yeah, no, again, what you are exerting or what you're exhibiting is the role of taste in this whole
Yeah.
process. I don't
Yes.
mean, by the way, I don't mean to imply it'd be distasteful to include Bezos. I love a lot of what Bezos has done. I leverage a ton of examples from his career.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm
Me
not
too.
saying
Me
that, and
too.
you're not saying that. But what I mean is that sense of taste, like curatorial ability, editorial ability. It's not just accepting everything that GPT gives, just like you don't accept everything you get from a book. It's
Yeah.
choosing, what do I discard? I love what you said, knowing what to steal. Can you tell us? This is a slight tangent from AI, but I can't resist the opportunity to just ask you this question. Anything you observed with Steve when you said that we knew what to steal, or how did you come to learn that was
Well,
so?
the crime occurred before I got to Macintosh division, so I wasn't a witness to that crime. But
But surely
he
there are other
he
examples.
but he and a bunch of guys went to Xerox PARC, and they obviously saw what you get display and printing and all that kind of stuff. And it triggers something in them that says you will make a user interface that emulates the real world, and that'll be easier for people, right? A trash can icon functions as a trash can. But we look back at it now and say, of course, but yeah, that was a pretty big breakthrough. Anybody could have done that before, including Xerox PARC, but they never commercialized it. I think when you truly look at quote unquote so many innovations, whether it's you go all the way back to Edison and say, oh, Edison invented the electric light bulb. But if you really did the research, man, there's a lot of people who are pretty close and contributed a lot to that. It wasn't like Thomas Edison was just sitting alone under a tree and the apple fell on him and that apple was a light bulb. It wasn't that simple. Yeah,
Speaking of
I
sorry.
think you can't be proud.
Speaking of the AI and GPTs and how unique they are becoming, you obviously knew Steve Jobs. If we took his emails and his books and a bunch of his recordings, do you get the sense that we would get pretty close if we made Steve Jobs GPT?
Listen, I am a mere mortal, and you can definitely incorporate my mere mortal capabilities and thoughts into LLM. Steve Jobs is not a mere mortal. He's several standard deviations beyond the norm. I would be surprised if you could. Now, having said that, if you don't mind me getting really bizarre and losing all potential readers of my book, I'm going to give you an argument that you're going to be shaking your head at, and maybe 20 years from now, you're going to say, freaking guy, he called it in 2024. He was so far ahead of his time.
But I think, Guy, I think you're getting at something really fascinating, which is the question of, call it omniscience, is fascinating. But I think also, how much do we exercise our own agency and our own understanding? And going back to the example of, you were willing to include the Julia Child example, but not the Bezos example, right? There's this editorial kind of cooperation, so to speak, that I think folks aren't as comfortable in that. What people like is they want the answer. Most people just want the answer really quickly and really easily, rather than engaging in a collaborative dynamic, a dialogue, a discussion. How did you, if you don't mind to go into it, how did you come to realize the importance of the dialogical back and forth, so to speak, with ChatGPT yourself?
Wait, that one went right over my head. So how did I come to?
How'd you realize the importance of having a conversation with ChatGPT?
Oh, because I think you go through subsequent rounds of the answer gets better and better. I'll give you another ChatGPT example in my life that showed me and how it progressed. This was Thanksgiving 2 years ago, and I asked Google, how do I roast a turkey, breast up or breast down? And Google, in its infinite wisdom in those days, gave 400,000 these links and there's to recipes.com, allrecipes.com, goodrecipes.com, badrecipes.com, southernrecipes.com. And finally, there's Martha Stewart. And I look at all those links and all those YouTube videos and I said, I'm going to just trust Martha Stewart. And Martha Stewart said, I think breast down. And I thought about that. And then I went to ChatGPT and I said, so should I cook a turkey breast up or breast down? And instead of giving me 400,000 links, it said, if you cook it breast down, that's where the most meat is. And that's where you want the most heat. So it cooks the fastest. And then run 1 hour before you think it's going to be cooked. Turn it over so you get the browning. That's all I wanted, right? That's all I wanted. And I figured out that as you improve your prompt through a course of conversation, it might ask you, you might figure out, it wants to know, it needs to know how heavy is the turkey, frozen or thawed. There's a lot of factors you can go through on that. And do you like white meat or dark meat? Do you like crispy skin or whatever, right? And I just learned that just like with a person, if you go to someone checking you in at United Airlines and you just ask one question, you might not get the optimal answer. You have to have a conversation, right? Is my flight on time? No. Then you're going to have to say, is there another flight that leaves before my flight, which has now been delayed? And then they may say, yeah. And then I say, if there's not, then I was originally scheduled to fly to San Francisco. Do you have another flight to San Jose? It takes a dialogue to finally get, oh shit, my flight's delayed, but I can catch another flight to San Jose. And it's about equidistance between San Jose Airport and San Francisco Airport. I just switched to San Jose and San Jose has like first class upgrades available that the lady just told me. So let's go. You need a dialogue for that. And I think it's the same way with ChatGPT.
But go back to that role playing as a good, or learning to have a conversation. Have there been times where you have leaned on ChatGPT's coaching or guidance to facilitate a human interaction or to kind of achieve a different outcome in a human interaction?
I cannot say I have. It just until 33 seconds ago, it never occurred to me. Oh, so listen, one of the situations you encounter as a surfer is when somebody yells at you. Although I'm deaf, so that doesn't bother me anymore. But when I was hearing, that would bother me and often it was my fault for getting yelled at. So I could go to ChatGPT and say, so what should I do when I drop in on somebody and they're yelling at me? That could make me a better person. Now, I have a real example for you though. So one of the people in my book that I interviewed was or is a professor at Middlebury in Monterey, not Middlebury in the East Coast. And she, believe it or not, is an expert in the art of how to apologize. And so I learned a lot about how to apologize. And I explained that technique to ChatGPT and asked for good examples. And in particular, I also went to ChatGPT and I said, give me examples of people who made terrible apologies. And out pops Mark Zuckerberg for the Cambridge Associates thing. And then out pops this politician who was not apologizing for the fact, that kids were killed. And there's a lot of examples. So I think that one should look at, for many people, as opposed to people trying to optimize a factory flow or something, many people can just use ChatGPT to just have a meaningful conversation to help refine their ideas. Now, just like when you have a conversation with any human, you need to have a little bit of skepticism. Don't get me wrong. ChatGPT could tell you Steve Jobs finished college and he didn't. So you need to have some skepticism. But you need to have some skepticism talking to any politician too. So what's the difference?
And I find especially, this is something that we've seen with friends who were helping get up the learning curve with things like ChatGPT. You can go into voice mode and you can have a very realistic conversation, right? Then you think about, what are conversations I'd love to practice before I get to this moment? I'll give you this as a gift, Guy, if you'd like it. But you can, with a surfer, it doesn't really work because you don't know who's going to yell at you or you don't know anything about them. But take somebody in your life, take Madison or take a partner or something like that, right? You can ask ChatGPT to play the role of, say, Madison. I'd like for you to play Madison and interview me about Madison so that you understand her well enough to believably play
Yeah,
her
yeah.
role. And then after we have this conversation, will you give me feedback that Madison would give me about how I approached it? And
Oh,
would you
that
have
would
any
work.
what's that?
That would work. That's
Yes.
amazing.
Yes.
Yeah,
No, it does
absolutely.
work. And we've seen that. We've seen people get to totally different levels of depth of intimacy and trust with loved ones, with bosses in salary negotiations, for example, where they're able to basically role play that conversation and get feedback on it and iterate on it before they go into the
Well,
real thing. Right.
okay, I'll tell you another example that along those lines that people will love. I hope it still works. One of my cars got damaged, and I don't know, my deductible was $1,000 or something, and they said that the damage wasn't $1,000. Tough luck, you didn't reach your deductible. But their estimate of this damage was based on going to your local body shop, and I wanted this car restored perfectly. So it was more like $5,000 than their $900. And so I went to ChatGPT. I says, compose a letter that says, I've been a customer for 40 years. By my calculation, I've been paying $5,000 insurance for 40 years. So I probably paid you $200,000. I've had $10,000 of deductions in 40 years. And I have all these good driver things, and I'm also insuring my house and my medical with you. So I probably represent several $1 million of revenue to you. So even though the deductible is 900 and your estimate is 800, I'm telling you my cost is 5,000 and you should pay that. And so ChatGPT generated a stinking letter and I sent it to him and I won. So
That's
I got the
brilliant.
full thing paid.
That's brilliant. What was the breakthrough, or what was the kind of angle that you feel like maybe ChatGPT gave you that was unique or insightful that maybe you wouldn't have used otherwise?
I think that ChatGPT it was so precise and it's so exacting in its language and so crisp that I think any adjuster reading that would say, this is not some dumb shit who's just trying to, rip me off or rip off Allstate. This person is clearly communicating and has a case to be made and, has expressed himself. And this does not look like a person we should just tell him to pound sand.
You snowed him over, so to speak. Right? You basically snowed him over.
Yeah, but I was justified. I have paid 200,000 in premiums. So I'm not feeling guilty.
No, of
Do
course not.
you
No,
have
it's
any
great.
other
It's a great example.
do you have any other of those examples? That's like such a good one.
Okay. Okay. I could give you an update after a week, but I use a GoPro to film my surfing, and GoPro has this remote that you wear on your wrist that you press your wrist to get the camera started at the front of your board. And I now have had 4 of those and they all have died. I have 3 of them left. The other, some of them I just throw away. So I'm going to put all 3 or 4 in an envelope and I'm going to have ChatGPT generate a letter about how disappointed I am about having 4 of these things not work. And I've owned GoPro 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And what's the story? Like, how come you guys can't make a remote? What's the problem? And then we'll see if GoPro says, oh, guy, you're such a great customer, such a one, you're such a clear communicator, or we just sent you 3 new remotes. And then we'll see.
So the jury's still out on this one. We don't, this is a perfect maybe place to end because it's a great cliffhanger, right? We have no idea. It's almost begs the opportunity to have you back on just to close the GoPro story.
Reach out to me. I'm going to I'm going to let ChatGPT generate that letter. And then we're just going to see what happens. Okay. Now, I hope
one thought that I can come back to, I don't know if you have any, just getting to very practical or tactical, because Kawasaki GPT kind of factored in so prominently to the beginning of the conversation. For someone who doesn't have the kind of body of material to load into a GPT, you're in a unique situation, right? You've got a lot of writing, you got a lot of podcast transcripts, et cetera. How would you recommend, if somebody hears what you explained and goes, I would love to have my own GPT, what would you recommend they do?
I think ChatGPT enables you to do this now. Now, I've used a company that handles everything for me, but I started this process before ChatGPT added this feature. And I just, I really wanted it done well. I didn't want to just hack around with it. Okay. I think here's the obvious answer. You ask ChatGPT, how do I create my own GPT? And I bet you it gives you an answer. I bet you it gives you a really great answer.
That's
I
brilliant.
have one
That's a
I have
perfect
one last
answer.
I have one last question. You obviously know and have written a lot about entrepreneurship. What do you think AI is going to mean for entrepreneurs?
I think if you're an entrepreneur and you're not heavily using AI, you're at a significant disadvantage. And I would say that for a student too. If you're a student, you're not using AI, life is going to pass you by. It's like saying, I'm a student, I'm not using the internet, I'm not using personal computers, I'm using Abacus and I'm using a pencil with a pencil sharpener and a ruler. And because I don't know what, I'm an artisanal learner. But I think as a first of all, I know that AI can probably make a better first pass pitch than you can, because not you, Henrik, but you, the entrepreneur, you should let you should let Canva. Canva will do it too. Make the first pass. These are my 10 slides. Product description, team, special advantage, go to market strategy, financial projections. You give it the topics and you say, okay, so this is, you got, obviously, you're going to do a lot of prompting, right? This is not just asking, how do I add a printer to a network? But I promise you that I look at pitches every day. And one of the things that I just don't understand is I have this rule for pitches called 10, 20, 30. So 10 slides that you can give in 20 minutes with the minimum 30-point font. Okay. I have spread that from C to C. The sun never sets on people who have read 10, 20, 30 rule. And every day I still get pitches from people who say they've aware of that has 30 slides with 10 points, and it would take them at least 60 minutes. And I do not understand that. So I bet you one thing you could do is take that shitty pitch you have, upload it to ChatGPT and say, ChatGPT, cut this down to 10 slides, make no font smaller than 30 points, and summarize and give me a new version. And I bet ChatGPT would do a great job. If you put it
Yeah,
in Kawasaki GPT, I guarantee you will do a great job.
you could probably even have it do mega specific pitch for Guy, right?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah,
But listen, the overarching lesson from my book and what we've been discussing about AI is, if you want to be remarkable and you want to make a difference, you have to use all the tools at your disposal. Don't be proud. Use all the tools you can.
Henrik, what do you think there, my friend?
you know
Reflections,
what
reactions.
what I thought was, we've done quite a few interviews now, and every time we talk to somebody, their journey into AI is different. It's always, obviously, per the context of this podcast, somebody who then have found a stunning amount of value out of using it, but
Mhm.
very specifically to how they work. And I would say, thirdly, and obviously for this episode, very relevant, people have a philosophical perspective of what this thing is. Like, it is it is not just another technology. I don't think it is just like the internet, where we talked about democratization and stuff like that. For most people, when they talk about this, we talked with Ethan Malik, who were saying 3 sleepless nights, talked to Guy here. It's pretty profound for people, which I find like interesting, that most people go there with a quote unquote simple technology. I don't think they said this about the iPhone, although that's probably one of the biggest innovations in our time. So I found that to be very interesting, very practically. I really like his 10 slide idea of just like, you have a pitch, just ask it to use that rule. I like the 10, 20, 30 rule. I had never heard about it, but it seems
Mm.
such a smart kind of concept. And so that was my initial thoughts. You?
Yeah, to me, I really liked his comment about Kawasaki GPT, that it's better at being me than me. And the thought that I've felt this way for a long time now, thinking in public as I do, that there are many of things that I quote unquote know that are no longer accessible to me. Like I need help remembering what I know. And to think about GPTs as an extension of our knowledge base and effectively expanding our ability to draw upon all the things we've known and learned, I think is really interesting. I also really liked his point about knowing what to steal and the metaphor of the tuning fork, that there really is a role of taste and editorial. It's not just that we take things wholesale, but rather we understand that we bring a unique, it's almost not that I understand this very, I'm not a biology guy, but like a molecular bond. If you think about the antioxidant, it's actually attaching to something. And you think about an output from an LLM, it's going to attach to something in you, or some part of it attaches to something in you. And I think that there's a lot more kind of folks should take the responsibility to deconstruct the molecule, probably more than they do. And his example, Julia Child and Jeff Bezos, I thought was a perfect illustration of that. I also love the point about restaurants. It's not like we're demanding that restaurants only use coal and knives, right? I think using all the tools available to us to produce the best quality work and the best possible impact on our, whether it's readers or listeners or customers' lives, I think is a noble ambition. And it's something that can get lost ironically or interestingly in all the philosophical kind of conversation. The thought of producing the very best possible outcome can sometimes get overlooked.
Now, one thing that I'm not sure I agree on in the Kawasaki GPT kind of argument is I tried, for example, to ask him while we were speaking, what are things that I should definitely not ask him about? And one of the things was highly polarized political topics. While guys not want to shy away from meaningful conversation, it's generally wise to steer away from highly political conversation, stuff like that. Now, what I think AI still doesn't give me, which Guy Kawasaki gave me in this conversation, is the unpredictable. The same thing, I've been trying to make my own new profile picture. And so I uploaded 20 pictures and I got rent all these one. And I showed it to my wife and she's, it's you, but it's not you. And so I think what is fascinating, which I don't think we got to double click as much on, but it'll be interesting in another episode, is what is the soulfulness of somebody you rendered through AI? And is it still there? So I think that's it. Do you want to wrap it up? You want to do the begging to the people listening it to share it with their friends?
Yeah, Henrik is often the one begging folks to share these episodes. I feel it's probably appropriate, symmetrical, if you will, for me to take a moment and say, if you like this episode, or if you hated it, if you want to share it with someone who will either like it or hate it, please do so. Please leave us a review. Let us know what you think, and hit subscribe so that you can get more conversations that you will either love or hate. We exist in your service, and we can't wait to share more with you soon. Have a great day.